Well, good afternoon, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to our webinar, Navigating University and Career Choices, Insights from Those Who've Been There. And today, my name is Bipasha Minocha, and today I come before you as your moderator, of course, but also not just in my official designation of CMO for EtonHouse, but more importantly, as a mother, as a parent who has walked this parenting journey around university applications not very long ago. And I understand this is a process, a long journey and full of uncertainty, a lot of questions, a lot of trepidations. And having gone through this process with my son, who, by the way, is one of the speakers today, this conversation is very, very close to my heart. And university and career choices is very different from what it was when I went to university, which is a million years ago. It used to be quite straightforward back then. The landscape was simpler. And today we have these endless possibilities, not just deciding on the subject to study, but also the destination, the different sort of expectations of different countries when it comes to navigating applications. And also it's about balancing your passion with some practical realities. And we will talk a little bit about that later today. But just something for us to remember that every student, every family's journey is very, very unique and every story is very different. So today we are extremely excited and very fortunate to be joined by three very inspiring EtonHouse alumni who've taken very different paths and have very different stories to narrate and share with us. So starting with Valerie. Valerie is a doctor. Hi, Valerie. She was just talking about how she was part of the very first batch at EtonHouse Broderick back in 1995, 96.
Yeah, right.
So thank you so much, Valerie. I mean, it's lovely to see that connection with EtonHouse even after so many years. So, and Valerie's daughter is in one of our schools as well. So it's a beautiful homecoming. So thank you, Valerie, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And then the second speaker we have today is Mahi. Mahi is a Berkeley graduate in music, business, and songwriting. And today she's joining us all the way from Los Angeles. Hi, Mahi.
Everyone. Hi, Bipasha. Thank you for having me. And it's so great to be speaking to all of you. I'm definitely excited to share whatever sort of advice or journey that I can.
Thank you, Mahi. Thank you for joining us. And we have Vansh. Vansh is a law undergraduate or soon to be law undergraduate at Warwick. He's starting his undergraduate journey in September this year, and he's currently doing his national service. Welcome, Vansh.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me again. Yeah, excited to get into this.
He also happens to be my offspring. So moving on. So yeah, they are here to share with us not just their successes, but very real experiences, the questions that they grappled with, the doubts that they had, the choices they made, and of course, the lessons they've learned along the way. We will try and unpack the why. Why did they choose what they have chosen in their career choices? And what were those different elements that came into consideration when they decided on their choice? So let's start at the beginning of every speaker's journey and those decisions around what field they decided to pursue and how that came to realization. So we're going to start with Mahi. At what point, Mahi, did you want to pursue music seriously? Because it's a unique choice. It's a very exciting choice, but also a choice that I'm sure you would have spent some time thinking and planning and working on. And how did you turn that into a career goal?
So to be completely honest, I was born into a musical family. And, my dad, that's not his profession, but it was definitely his hobby, his passion. And so I grew up writing songs, being very musical. As I'm sure you all know, there's a lot of opportunity in EtonHouse for, if you have an artistic child, there's a lot of space for them to express that, to explore that talent. And so I say all of this to say that I knew from the beginning that it was music because of the way that my parents supported me, because of the way that EtonHouse constantly gave me opportunities to explore my talent. And it was always a given. I don't ever remember having a conversation specifically on what am I going to do? But there were definitely many conversations on, okay, how am I going to do it? Where am I going to study? What is it going to look like to start a career up in this? And, I'm a fresh graduate. I graduated a year ago. And one thing that we learned that I'm sure we'll get into more into detail later is how to financially sustain yourself. I think people are curious to know how to balance passion and practicality, and music is obviously, uh, more of a creative, passionate dive that you have to take. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely ways to sustain yourself in the arts financially and emotionally. And that's something that I'm learning as I go along. But overall, I was definitely thanks to the support of the EtonHouse faculty and my parents that I knew, okay, I can apply for music and I can pursue it.
Thank you, Mahi. We'll dial back later on some of what you said, especially the how. I think a lot of students will benefit from what that looks like in terms of building that track all the way to university choice, and especially when you're going to study music. So we'll come back to it later. I'd like to go on to Vansh now. And, Vansh, it's interesting that you're now doing your national service and you've decided to study law. So at what point were you sure or were you confident that this is what you wanted to do? Because traditionally, law is not a subject that's offered in school.
No, you're 100% correct. Law isn't a subject that's offered in school. For me, though, personally, it was mostly exploration. I just kept exploring. I was quite young when I got exposed to it, having family in law, even watching little legal dramas. But it kind of evolved into me asking questions. I think I really disturbed some of the lawyers in my family with loads of different questions, which probably had no relevance, to be completely honest, when I was that age. So then from there, it moved on to me pursuing different in-person courses. So I eventually did a summer course at Berkeley, which was it was a lot of different subjects, but law was one of them. And I figured that I liked law quite a lot, so I figured I would do a summer course the next year at a different university and do something that focused solely on the subject. It was mostly international law at that point. I think gaining the confidence, to be honest, was getting the confirmation came from an internship that I did, where obviously I saw and I understood that the associates that I worked with in the law firm had a mountain of work all the time. But I got to do the research, I got to be a part of the construction of arguments, and I thought that doing that was quite satisfying to me. It also helped a lot for me that when I went to the Singapore Police Force, which is where I'm currently completing my national service, we learnt a lot about criminal law. And I think that really solidified the choice for me.
Well, thank you for sharing. So that's been quite the journey with summer courses, internship, and your national service at the moment. So we'll go a little bit more into your university applications later on. But I want to move on to Valerie, and I'm very excited about her profession as well. It's a career in medicine. It is a career that requires a significant amount of resilience, a lot of work, a lot of passion. So Valerie, when in life did you decide you wanted to be a doctor?
I decided quite early on when I was about age 11 or 12. I think I was quite mature for a kid back then and a little bit of an identity crisis. But then I was wondering, oh, what's the purpose of studying? What's the purpose of working till you grow old? And I felt that I wanted something that contributed to the good of others. And even when I was younger, I already found that I quite like having a personal touch with people. And so interacting with patients would then give that dimension to it. Yeah, so basically I wanted a job that wouldn't feel like a job that I would enjoy doing into my old age. And then I concluded that it was probably medicine for me.
Right, so it looks like the three of you were very sorted, 10, 11 years of age, you knew what you wanted to do, which is, from my personal experience, something that's not very common. A lot of times you have students in their first year of university still deciding what would be the best course of action. Sometimes you might even change your career after you've completed your undergrad. So, what would you say to someone who is unsure about their future, who's probably in year 12, year 13, about to do their A levels or IB diploma, applying to university, but still not sure about the course of, not just the course of study, but the career option that they have in mind eventually. So Valerie, we can start with you. What would you say to a student who's not sure?
Yeah, I think it's exactly as you pointed out. The three of us here are the minority who decided early on what to do. Actually, majority of our counterpart students have had a clue even at that age. And so I think it's important. It's important for someone who feels unsure to take the time to figure out what he or she finds purpose in and truly enjoy doing. It is okay to decide late. Some people take a gap year after high school or junior college. They go on to explore their interests and discover themselves. In fact, even within medicine, many of my colleagues entered medicine after reading an entirely different subject in university. They could have even done liberal arts, or engineering, something unrelated, and then worked in that field for a few years, and then decided that they would want to do medicine instead. Yeah. So I think taking your time to come to a decision is much better, okay, than hastily jumping into a career that you may come to resent or regret later on.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's excellent advice. And you're right about the gap year part, because recently it's become pretty common for students to take a gap year after I think it's the intense pressure of your A levels and IB diploma and then applying for university. Sometimes you do not get into the university of choice. It's a very common sort of, rite of passage, so to speak, to take a gap year before you start university. So I'm just going to check with Mahi and Vansh, what are your thoughts? Have your friends taken this path, done a gap year, and was it something that was meaningful for them or helped them understand or give them some clarity as to what they would like to do after? So I'll start with Mahi.
Well, yes, I've definitely had some friends who've taken a gap year. And like both of you are saying, Bipasha and Valerie, it's such a beautiful idea that there isn't any sort of big rush, that there is an abundance of time. And taking a gap year allows you to decompress, to travel. Some of my friends have traveled, and I think that also getting to explore different places and countries aside from different majors and career paths is equally helpful, because a lot of the times you can choose the right career path or maybe the right major, but maybe you don't resonate with the place that you're studying in, which can make a difference. So a gap year can be so useful to slow down, to talk to people in different career paths, to travel and explore different cultures, which could then lead you to where you want to study. And in general, I think Vanch was mentioning in a previous discussion that it's also great to have a little bit of a gap between between school and college, because that way you can focus on school, take a minute, and then focus on college. So overall, I think a gap year could be great. And at the same time, there are pros and cons to everything. And I'd say the only con to a gap year, because in some funny way, I ended up, even though I technically didn't have a gap year, I started college immediately. Because of COVID, I started it online. But that meant that I stayed in Singapore for an additional amount of time. So it kind of feels like I had a gap year. And the only con of that is that it can make you lose momentum a little bit, because in high school you're so used to studying and you're used to having that routine, and in some ways it's kind of nice to go from one routine to another. But again, pros and cons, and I think it's always great to remember that there is time and to alleviate pressure from yourself in any way possible.
Right. And well, talking about routine, it's a completely different routine that Vansh is onto these days. He's got late night shifts and day shifts, very different from what, his friends in university are used to at the moment who've started university. So Vansh, what are your thoughts about a gap year? I know you didn't have the luxury of one in a way, but yeah, what about your friends who've taken a gap year? Do you think that's helped them?
Well, I actually disagree. I think I've had the luxury of 2 gap years. But no, I I have loads of friends who have taken gap years, and I think that it's very commonplace now, and it's quite useful. I think if you don't know what you want to do, uh, if you just want a break from school, which is completely fine, because that kind of routine, as Mahi said, that kind of routine is exhausting, right? You go to school, you come home, you revise. It it gets a little bit exhausting, it gets a bit monotonous. Sometimes people just need a break, or sometimes they don't know what to do, and either way, it's completely fine. I think taking a gap year is good. It also exposes you to different parts, right? As Mai said, you can travel, you can start working. A lot of my friends started working at that point. Um, there there's a plethora of experiences that you can have during your gap year, and I think it's I think it's very good, especially if you're not entirely sure what to do, because the beauty of a gap year is that you don't have to worry about you don't have to stress about making your predicted grades for whatever university that you're planning to go to. If you decide to apply to your university during your gap year, you will have the luxury of having your real grades, the ones that you have gotten yourself to apply with, and there'll be no pressure at all to reach a predicted grade. You just apply, and either you get in or you don't.
Yeah. And like you said, I think when you take a gap year, like yourself, for 2 years, you tend to miss the routine of that, getting to work, getting to college, sitting in a class, coming back, doing your assignments. You're missing it, I know that. So in a way, it's always grass is always greener on the other side. So sometimes it's important to go, experience that bit of a circuit breaker and then realize how special that opportunity to study is and want to go back in refreshed and rejuvenated. So yeah, I think there's consensus on the gap year there. So we've talked about, the why and some of the ways in which you can unpack the why in your own way. I think we now go into the next question that people might ask is the how and what was that whole process of application. So Valerie, I'll start with you. So when did you start preparing for medical school applications? We know it's a long process, it's many, many years of studying and, internship and all of that. So, when did it start and what did that process involve? And where are you now in your career in terms of that journey?
So in terms of preparation, I actually started in junior college. So about 17 years old. That's 2 years before entering university because junior college is 2 years long. So in my college then there was this co-curricular activity that you call medical society. So back then I ran for and I became the president of the medical society. And that gave me exposure, a lot of exposure to like-minded people, as well as provided a lot of attachment opportunities in different healthcare settings. So when you're applying for medicine, I think what we are looking at mainly is how committed and how interested you are. If you have a CV or portfolio that's geared towards an entirely different occupation, no formal experience in a shadowing or healthcare setting, then sometimes it makes us question how passionate you are. And it's important because, as you mentioned, it's a rigorous course. And also, I think locally the government puts a lot of effort and funding into training doctors. So therefore, we don't want someone who might quit halfway, especially when it gets tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even in a subject combination, at least in my time, for university, chemistry is a requirement to read medicine, and therefore chemistry is one of the subjects I chose when I to decide on my subject combination as well. In terms of where am I in my career now, I, I mean I'm about 10 years post graduation. Okay, yeah, I won't sugarcoat it. I think the first 10 to 15 years of medicine is going to be tough for everyone, especially the house officer year. You don't get much sleep, and then you're always studying all the time. Even until about 1 year ago, I was still studying. So after my undergrad degree, I did my master's degree, and then after that, I did another one, in between, and then a fellowship. Yeah. So it's so
Very
if you count it, it's about four. Yeah, all the way until the last year. So it's about 10 years. Yeah. And then
kudos
if
to Valerie.
yeah, so you can imagine it's a lot of juggling because a lot of us are married with kids at the same time. Usually our kids are quite young. Yeah, so these are all the sacrifices usually you have to make in medicine, and you have to balance everything. You can't stall one part of your life because you're always going to be studying and working for a lot of your working life.
We'll have you on another webinar. We're going to talk about life skills and prioritizing and executive function skills, because clearly you're acing it. And I was wondering, when you was talking about studying, I was thinking about your little girl and how you manage to juggle and a full-time job, so it's not easy. So yeah, those of you who are aspiring to be medical practitioners, I think yes, A-level chemistry is still a requirement. And also, so you have to love chemistry. That's one. But also you should have the resilience and the keenness and the propensity to continue to study for a very long time. And I guess that goes for law as well, to a large extent. So the ability to continue to study, basically, and take exams and, upgrade yourself at every point. So yeah, that's quite an incredible journey, Valerie. Mahi, we're going to move on to you. A very different career proposition that you've chosen for yourself. But what was different about your application process? Because to do qualification in music, do you need to learn or be proficient in a musical instrument? What was that sort of whole requirement to do this course?
Well, so to begin with, I definitely didn't need to have taken A-level chemistry for my music degree. But I think, so as you can imagine, the whole process for me was much more audition based than it was application based. So my main instrument is my voice, but I'm also a songwriter and a performer. So when I was auditioning, my instrument was my voice, and I was auditioning for the music business and songwriting course. And so for me, I started preparing about a year before I graduated from high school. So this is when I was 16, and I auditioned when I was 17. And my audition looked like preparing two pieces. One, I decided to do an original song to showcase my songwriting, and the other was a more classical technical piece. And then on top of that, there's ear training. So learning how to sing scales, learning how to sight read, learning how to improvise in different genres. So all of this is part of the more practical part of the audition. And then there was also some written aspects, like an essay and also a video of all of my work so far, my performances so far. And that's what the audition looks like for Berkeley in terms of how grades factor in for more creative and musical schools. I'd say that it is a consideration, especially for scholarships. Even though it is a creative school, they still want to see, okay, well, how disciplined is this student? And they look at grades for that. But at the same time, grades aren't the end all be all. I am going to be honest, I've always been very curious. I really owe that to EtonHouse. I've always enjoyed school. So I think it's always important to encourage your child to be all-rounded, just from a place of curiosity and passion for learning. But specifically when it comes to auditioning and applying for creative fields, grades aren't there. I would say they're like 40%, and then the audition is 60%.
Wow. Well, Mahi, you have a beautiful voice, and
I
can't wait to hear you sing someday, if I ever have the good fortune to hear you sing. But I can really imagine you singing. I'd love to see one of your original songs. That'll be
definitely. Thank you so much.
so lovely. Moving on to Vansh. Vansh, you applied to the UK, which is different from Mahi and Valerie. So when you started working on your UCAS application, when was that? Did you need to prepare way in advance for that application? Perhaps you could give us a little bit of an overview of the difference between a UK and a US application process, and you choosing the UK over the US. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. So my timeline in general for applying to the UK, it's unorthodox for people who aren't doing national service, considering I had 2 gap years. So I could really zero in on my A-levels during my A-levels time. Obviously, I was considering universities and a lot about my application during my penultimate year, like most people do. But I think a bit of a wake-up call for me was when I was speaking to a university counselor, and it became quite apparent that universities in the UK, especially the ones that I was interested in, wouldn't exactly accept 2 gap years. So I would have been applying to 2 universities, essentially. So essentially what I decided to do was put my head down, focus on my A levels throughout my final year, and bolster my super curriculars, which is what you need for the UK. It's a tad different from the US in the way that I think for the US they love looking at your extracurriculars and what you do outside of school, what you know your sports, your drama, your music, all of them, all of them. Um, it's very extracurricular based in the US, whereas in the UK, it's a lot more super curricular based, which is reading different parts about what your subject is, about what you what you prefer in your given subject. They want to see how interested you are in whatever you do. So that's a bit on the difference. But yeah, so for me, I really had a lot of time to focus on my A levels first, and then I applied during my first year of national service with a gap year clause, so that I would come in this year instead of last year. But a lot of my friends have applied in their final year of national service, so they can go straight into uni. I felt that applying with a gap year was good, just because it gives me a bit of a safety net if I didn't like the unis that I had gotten into in the first year. If I didn't get into where I would have wanted to, I could always change it up, and I could always reapply the next year. There wasn't too much stress. So that's the timeline for me. I think for people who aren't doing NS, obviously the brunt of the work will be done at the end of your penultimate year and at the beginning of your final year of school.
Yeah, thanks for that. I remember when you were writing your personal essay, there was a lot of because of everything that you'd done in your school life, you wanted to talk more about those, and we were the counselor was telling you to cut it down and focus only on the subject-based sort of into deep dive that you've done, which is reading articles or doing law internship or law programs. So it's very different with the UK vis-a-vis the US. They're not interested if you're the captain of your basketball team, to be honest. They want you to focus or show that you're truly interested in the subject that you want to pursue. But having said that, I know it's a bit confusing. We went through that process as well to understand what the expectations are for the two tracks. UCAS is definitely more straightforward. And the US is obviously, because you're applying to different universities, every university has its own expectation. But every school, especially, I would love to put in a little plug here. EtonHouse for sure has an outstanding university counseling team that works with students as early as year 7, when they're starting to understand the different career choices, all the way till when they put in the applications. And yes, in the US, they require to see a more all-rounded sort of personality, or sort of work which is beyond your super curriculars. And that's where, if you see the A levels at EtonHouse, it has something called the Eton Co. And I'm not going to talk too much about it. I know this is we're not trying to sell EtonHouse here, but it's good to know. It's good to have that confidence that your sixth form sort of team is working to help you succeed in the university track and the university of choice. So I'll stop talking on that. Right. So yes, please, Mahi.
Sorry to interrupt, but I just actually wanted to add one point to this question on the whole application process and what that's like. One thing that I would love to share, and this extends to all careers, all countries, all sorts of universities, but one thing that I did that I believe gave me an edge, that my dad helps me with, was during your child's interview process, the more focused that they can be on explaining why specifically that they're fit for that university, the better. So sharing, like, hey, if I were to get into this university, beyond just doing this major, I want to take this class with this professor, because I followed them and I've seen their talk. So the more specific your child can get with which classes they want to take, even if they don't end up taking those classes. I know that I said I wanted to do music therapy, but I didn't end up pursuing that. But it helped during my audition process to show that focus and to show that I already have an agenda set up for myself if I were to get into this university. And I think that's something that applies to, like I said, all countries, all careers, all universities. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Right. I think we've talked about different universities. Valerie, just a little bit about, because we haven't talked about the Singapore university applications. If you can just talk us through some of the, sort of preparations that you did prior when you were in junior colleges, when you were in junior college, and whether or not you considered a US or UK pathway as well.
Actually, back in my time, it was very rare to find someone take a gap year. Yeah, I think society has progressed in that we no longer view it negatively. In my time, if you had seen someone had taken a gap year, we would think like, oh, was this person too stressed? And then or had a nervous breakdown in between and then had to take a year off. That was the perception 20 years ago. Yeah, but thankfully it's no longer this. We respect people taking their time to explore their interests. So because of that, majority of the people in my cohort would then be balancing your university applications together with your A-levels. And that meant that we would start the university applications very, very early on in the year because A-levels is in November. And in the 6 months prior to exams, you really want to be focused on preparing for exams rather than applications. So I actually did my SAT exams for for US applications very early on in the year. And I also applied to a few different UK universities. Basically, I cast my net wide in the early part of the year when I had more time. But then eventually, as the year went on, I actually decided to stay in Singapore for more personal reason, and that was to be around for my grandparents as they age in their healthy years and in their sick years. Being the youngest of 3 children, I had one older sister who went to the US to study. I had an older brother who went to Canada to study. And then I had the benefit of hindsight in realizing that a lot of times, once you study there, you're likely to work there. Generally, you won't come back to where you came from. Yeah, so then because my grandparents were very dear to me, I wanted to be there for them eventually when they would fall ill. And so I did that. Eventually, when they had dementia and cancer successively, I was there for them all the way to the time that they passed on. And I've never regretted studying locally because of that.
Thank you for sharing that, Valerie. I guess eventually all the dots connect, and it's beautiful, your journey and being with your grandparents right till the end. So thank you for sharing that. Mahi, you mentioned that you, attended some summer courses as well for Vanj. So how did that help you in preparing for your application and for your, your sort of sealing your deal or sealing the music choice as a career option?
It helped so much. It definitely helped. So I'm not sure if I mentioned this yet, but I went to Berklee College of Music, which is based in Boston. And I did 2 summer courses with them before when I was still in high school. And it helped so much because you get such a sense of the culture of the school, what the professors are, what the student to professor ratio is like, which makes a difference, right? And that's one thing that I loved about Berklee is that despite it being a big enough university, the student professor ratio was still very intimate, very controlled. And just in general, I mean, I think the connections that you make can also really help with your move to college because you already have a network set up for yourself from your summer courses. So in terms of, and also just exploring, like I said, the culture of the college, one thing specifically I'll say about the US is that it's great for creative industries. It's great for the entertainment industry. That's sort of the hub of it, especially for music. And then beyond that, I think, of course, the US has so many microcultures, so I can only speak for the ones that I've experienced in Boston and LA, but there's just a lot of importance on self-expression, self-exploration, which I think are things that are important in creative industries to have that space. And beyond there being a lot of opportunity here, now I'm speaking broadly, not just for creative industries, there's also a lot of space to create your own opportunities here. There's a lot of space for entrepreneurship. And even with the internships I've had with Universal Music Group and actually, funnily enough, a tech company, because I mean, it just goes to show you can keep exploring your options. But even the internships that I've had, there's a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurship, and that's one thing that I really value about the US is that it values innovation and it values self-expression. So I think those are the pros for the US, and some things to prepare your children for and to prepare yourselves for if you are considering the US is that if you're not a citizen, of course, there is a barrier to entry when it comes to finding internships and finding jobs. To be completely honest, I know that I've had to have applied, if my friends that were citizens applied to 20 jobs, I had to apply to 80. And that's just honest. But I think it can feel very worth it again because of the culture and because of the network. And so one thing that I would suggest to you, of course, you can take it or leave it, is to encourage your children to build a network when they're in college, because that's the best opportunities I've gotten have been because I leveraged my network from Berkeley, not only with my professors, but with my fellow students as well. And so I think if you're an international student and if you are going to study abroad, just really, really build your network and make sure to keep in touch with your professors even after graduation so that that connection is ready there for you when you are looking for a project or you need to recruit somebody for your own project.
Thank you, Mahi. Networking is absolutely critical, but the way you've intentionally sort of integrated that into your student life, even before that, going to various internship programs, I think that's the reason why you are where you are at the moment. So well done on that. Vansh talked about going to a summer course in Berkeley as well as Cambridge. So I think that's something I would definitely recommend, even as a parent, because when you take your children to these summer courses, you get a sense of the university, you get to see the university accommodation, and as Mahi rightly said, the culture. And yes, there are microcultures, but the culture and the whole experience that as a parent we had, and of course Vansh as well, in Berkeley vis-a-vis Cambridge was very, very different. So this is something that is very important for you to understand what is the best fit. Like we always recommend to our families, come and visit the schools, get a sense of the culture, the interactions between adults and students, etc., to be able to make that decision. So I think that's absolutely critical. On that note, another plug, we are actually, we have collaborated with an Oxford summer course program, and we will be offering it to all of our EtonHouse students and students outside of EtonHouse as well to do 2-week internship or a study program in Cambridge and Oxford. So that information should be on our website. So if you're keen to apply, that's an opportunity for your sons and daughters to get through an experience in an actual university. So that's absolutely critical. Vansh, moving on to you and, segue from that point that I was making about the US and UK, what made you choose the UK over the US, or even, being in Singapore to study law?
What made me choose the UK over the US? Well, to be honest, in the beginning, I was heavily considering universities in the US as well. I always knew that I loved the culture in the UK, but I also really like the look of unis in the US. But the problem with that is the deeper logistics of that decision, considering my national service and my career choice in the law. It's not exactly a logically sound idea. Similarly to Mahi, the summer courses that I did as well, I think they really opened up my eyes to the different parts of the US and the UK. I think while the US is incredible, you can explore everything that you want to. I think the UK is great if you want, so if you know exactly what you want, if you know exactly where you want to study, if you know exactly what you want to study and what you want to do, the UK is great. But the US is incredible for exploring. For me, I knew what I'd wanted, and logistically, in the UK, for law, you'll have 3 to 4 years of undergrad and then various exams of the SQE, the law of trusts, and then finally you are a qualified lawyer. But in the US, after your 4 years of undergrad, which would be presumably in pre-law, but it can be in anything really, you'd have another 3 years of law school, and then you would have 1 year of preparing for the bar in your respective state. So considering that I started national service at 18, finish at 20, I would only finish I would only become a qualified lawyer in the US by the time I was 28, whereas in the UK it would be 24. And obviously, if I had the luxury of time without national service, maybe I would have applied to the US. But unfortunately for me, a mixture of preferring the culture, a mixture of liking the fact that I can just do the subject that I like at university, and national service, obviously. Those were all the bits that I decided to pursue my degree in the UK.
Well, life is always a balance, and it's always a balance between passion and what's pragmatic or practical. And like you said, at 24 versus 28, that's a big question there right away. And it's very obvious for most of us as to why you made that choice. So thank you for sharing that story. Right. So I think the other question, and this is quite important because parents and students are very, sort of, they want what's best for themselves and for their children. So there is a lot of prestige attached to top tier schools, be it Ivy League schools or Russell Group universities or the Oxbridge destination. So, and that typically defines success for a lot of us. So, and this is a question to each one of you. So now that you made those choices, Valerie, your way into your career and your profession, Mahi, you're starting out in Vanch, right at the beginning of your undergrad. What does success mean to you compared to what you thought it was in school? Valerie, I'll go with you first.
I think in my younger days, success was more one-dimensional. It was just about enjoying what I did, pursuing personal growth. But now, because I'm always multi-hatting, I have roles as a mother, as a wife, as a doctor. I also have administrative and educational roles in my organization. So to me, it means being able to balance every facet of life and being present in each moment for the person in front of you, whether it's someone at work, someone at home. And I think it's also about taking the small wins in life. When you're younger, you tend to look towards very long term and very big goals. But then when you start working, you realize that not so many things have a very long range like that. It's more, usually things would be in the form of projects, little goals here and there, multiple goals, little but multiple goals. And so it's just about being grateful for your daily blessings. You mentioned earlier about the getting into Ivy Leagues being the common perception of success. I think when you're younger, you tend to put a lot more weight on the prestige of the university you go into. But then in the working world, it becomes very different because at the end of the day, it really boils down to how well you interact with the others around you. Actually, EQ matters a lot more than your IQ in working. And so therefore, I think we're quite blind to the university one graduates from in medicine because especially for healthcare setting, you often have to work in teams, and it really boils down to how well you can work with each other and how well you can build that synergy. Yeah, so I think in that sense, looking back, I think if I could tell my fellow counterparts, probably we wouldn't obsess and stress so much about the university that we got into. It's more of making the most of your university education wherever you end up in, and building on your soft skills.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yes, they are no longer soft skills anymore. They are absolutely essential life skills for us. So yeah, as you know, I'm doing a leadership course with INSEAD, and they were talking about this red and blue way of management leadership. And in fact, a lot of the subject matter in business schools, the top business schools, are actually obsolete in today's working environment. So they're having to rethink of it, because business schools were created when the Industrial Revolution started. So there was a different objective of creating an MBA course vis-a-vis what it is today, and how it's all changing from the red to the blue, where we are functioning in a day and age of complete uncertainty, where innovation is absolutely critical and no longer about execution and scaling, and it's all about strategy and innovation. So it was a very, very interesting point for us, where I am in my career as well, to understand the importance of what you were rightly saying, the ability to work and confidently work in a social context. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, Valerie. Any other thoughts from Mahi, Vansh on this? What would success be for you? Has that changed the definition of success?
Well, I 100% agree with Valerie. I think the small wins in life are what I look at as success right now. I think when you're younger, she was right. When you're younger, you look at the long term, the big things. Getting the best grades, being the best at whatever sport you play, getting the lead role in a play. But I think the smaller wins, it's more about the journey than the destination. I know that's a cliche term, but it's 100% true. I think what you build during the journey is infinitely more valuable than any kind of result that you could ever get, to be honest, because you build it inside of yourself. You're the person that's going to have to live with yourself for the rest of your life. The outside validation of getting the best grades, being the best at whatever, it's great, but what you can lose things you can't lose inside yourself, though.
That was so beautiful. And I think, to add to what both you, Valerie and Vansh, said, is I think when I was younger, I mean, I'm speaking as if I'm very old and headed towards retirement now, but when I was younger than I am today, I think my idea of perfection was my idea of success was a little bit naive, it was a little bit, I had this movie in my mind of like, oh, I'll graduate from high school and I'll go to Berkeley. So I'm happy that was one dream that came true. And then I'll get signed to this huge record label, and then this will happen, and Beyonce will come knocking on my, like, all of these like sort of naive.
Beyonce still can come knocking on your door.
Yeah. Of course, I haven't lost hope at all, but I think it's more just this idea of like, my idea of success was that it has to happen so fast, and that it all has to be consecutive, that there's no room for failure or being lost. But now my idea of success is, rather than perfection, it's just persistence. So even if I do feel a little lost, even if I am still figuring out how to financially and emotionally sustain myself, because like we were saying, both are important. Even though I don't have it all perfect at all, and I don't think anybody ever does, as long as I'm being persistent and showing up for myself, and still sitting down and writing, and still sitting down and applying, still going to work and doing my best, I think that's what really counts as success. And I love what you said, Valerie, about presence, and what you said, Vansh, about success being about building your inner world, so that's where you're drawing your worth from. Both of those are such beautiful sentiments, because we get so wrapped up in our accomplishments and our achievements, and like you were saying, Vansh, these external validators. But I mean, true success, just my dad always says to me, he says, you already are a success. And it's not because of what you've done or because of your grades, but just because of who you are. And that's such a beautiful sentiment to carry, I think, for ourselves, for our kids. I don't have kids, but when I do, I will. Just that idea of you already are a success, and that comes from who you are versus what you've done.
Wow, I feel so empowered now with those words from each one of you. That's beautiful. I think we're all gonna create memes of it and keep it for constant reinforcement. That was beautiful. You're already a success. Thank you, Mahi, Vansh, and Valerie. I know it's a beautiful way to end, but we're still a couple of minutes to when we get to the finish line. So what we're going to do is just one last question, and then we're going to try to take some questions from the audience. If you've done anything differently in this journey that you have been on so far, what would that have been and why? Anyone wants to take a stab on that?
I mean, doing something differently, I think not being as hard on myself. I think it's quite obviously, you can't be easy on yourself, but it's quite easy to get into a place where you're inside your own head. It's quite easy to really psych yourself out about not only what you want to do, even if you've figured out what you want to do. I know that I had. It's really easy to psych yourself out about, oh no, am I going to get into this uni? Am I going to get into that uni? And like why would a big prestigious university like that want me specifically, right? It's an existential question, but then I think when you think about it logically, they want a certain amount of people per year. So I think when you start thinking about it a little bit more logically, you stop getting in your head so much, and you stop thinking, "Oh, am I good enough?" And you start thinking that how can I show that I am?
Thank you, Vansh. Any plans, Valerie? Anything you've done differently?
At least in my studying and in my career, I don't have much regrets. I don't think I've done anything differently. I enjoyed junior college a lot. I played as hard as I studied. So it was
Wow.
all good, yeah. But I definitely agree with what Vansh said. About how you shouldn't look at it you shouldn't look at it too personally if you don't get into a particular university, because at the end of the day, it's all about numbers to them, right? But you are not a statistic, you're more than a statistic. So then you shouldn't let it get into your head so much. Yeah, I totally agree with what you said.
Yeah, it's not you, it's them.
That's such a beautiful sentiment that you're more than a statistic. And I think one thing that maybe I would have done different is, especially when you study abroad, a lot of a big part of what you have to navigate through is your homesickness, and just going to class and making sure that you're setting up a good school and social life for yourself while feeling very homesick and while kind of struggling with this sense of belonging. And so one thing that I would have done different is, I think, to be honest, my first year I spent a lot of it also because of COVID, so we actually couldn't meet as many new people. Even though I love meeting new people, what I did for my first year was sort of keep calling people from home a lot, even when I eventually did move out for the first few months. And one thing that I would suggest is, if you are going to study abroad, to push yourself out of your comfort zone, to encourage your children to balance staying in touch with their old friends and their family, but also push themselves to be present. Like you were saying, Valerie, presence is so important. To be present with who is in front of you and what is in front of you, even if it is scarier to make new friends than to turn to old ones. So I think in the end, I'm so happy with the friends that I came out of university with. I just know that because of COVID and because of my own homesickness, I was a little slower to put myself out there. So that's one thing I would have maybe done different, but at the same time, no regrets. And in general, like Vansh, like you said, to not be so hard on yourself. And I think for me, more specifically, to stay in touch with the joy of music that music brought me in the first place. Because when you study something, even if it is something that aligns with your passion, no matter what it is, once you choose to pursue it, there is an element of pressure there, because now you have to find an internship in this field and rely on it to make money and sustain yourself and give you success, and all of this pressure comes in. So in whatever way possible, if you're passionate about law, to stay in touch with that joy by continuing to watch your legal dramas, like you did, Bunch. Or if you're into music, to continue writing songs outside of class and that aren't graded and that can be really bad actually, but it's just about expressing yourself. And if you're passionate about medicine and how personable you get to be with that, to continue to engage with your patients and maybe engage with people in that personable way, but outside of your job. So I think that's another thing, is to stay in touch with your why and to nurture that joy as much as you can, and keep it safe from the pressure.
Yes, absolutely. And just a word of caution there, the legal dramas and the medical dramas are nothing like what it is in real life. And so when Vansh was getting really, really inspired to be another Harvey Specter, we actually had to sit him down and said, life is not like, having a glass of Macallan and just strutting in and making $1 million deals just like that. So it doesn't happen like that. Valerie, you vouch for that as well. Those dramas are all very hypothetical and a lot of sort of entertainment values. So don't go with just the dramas, but it's a great way to start the journey as Vansh started. So I think on that note, we don't have any specific questions that have come in from the audience, but what we can do is, if you have any specific questions for either of us, I'm also happy to help and to share my perspective, not just as a parent, but also someone as part of the education profession. Happy to do so. You could just write into admissions@etonhouse.edu.sg or respond to the information that's available on our website where we have the webinar details. So on that note, I must say how much I enjoy this conversation, more as a parent than a professional. It's been a tumultuous journey, to say the least, to walk alongside my son in that entire process. And I remember the extreme sense of I can't even begin to explain in words when you finally accept that offer from the university and that journey is to some extent completed. So it's a beautiful feeling. So I wish the same for every single parent out there. It's an important and very fulfilling journey. So be there for your children. And enjoy this process. So on that note, I'd really like to thank our speakers. You've been incredible. Mahi joining us all the way from LA. Valerie, I know you're such a busy doctor, and to find time to be with us today is incredible. And Vansh, thankfully you did not have your morning shift today and you're present for us. So just wanted to share this quote right at the end before we finish. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. And that's by Eleanor Roosevelt. And on that note, signing off, but you have a lot of this information available on our parenting forum. So do log in. Yeah, enjoy all this content, enjoy this journey, and enjoy your children. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you again soon.